Right, we're gonna take up the bottle bill in a moment with a bunch of witnesses, but before that, we're just gonna spend a brief moment hearing from Department of Liquor and Lottery, if you wanna just join us about the new draft.
Morning, everyone. Charles Martin, Legend Comms Director for the Department of Liquor and Lottery. Just wanted to be very brief, as the chair noted, and say we really are so appreciative of your critical thinking on this bill and your input on consumer protections, advertising limitations. They all seem very sensible. We've got to put a little bit more thought into the revenue piece, not anything earth-shattering, but something we need to think a little bit more about as a department. But really just wanted to express our thanks for your work on the bill so far. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, switching gears again. H-158. I think we're gonna start with Mr. Chapman. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
As you know, Ways and Means, we are focused on the dollars coming to the state or not coming to the state. We have a little bit of concerns about the clean water money.
Okay.
And recognize that the producer responsibility organizations need some money to expand their, so.
Sure. So,
Anything you want to share with us?
sure. So for the record, my name is Matt Chapman. I'm the Director of the Waste Management and Prevention Division within the Department of Environmental Conservation, and my program is the one that oversees the administration of the bottle bill. I think I was open to talk about three things, knowing the committee's jurisdiction. One is the deposit and the changes that are proposed in the bill to the deposit. The second is the funding mechanism and just alerting the committee to what that is for the agency in the bill. And then lastly, to go over the sheets and what happens to the unreclaimed deposits and the potential impacts associated with that. I also provided, and it's in my testimony, a flow chart of how the deposit works. And I'm happy to go through that if that is a subject of interest to the committee. I'm also happy to just leave it if.
I think we all sort of get it enough that us looking at the flow chart on it.
So if you look at online at my testimony, you'll see there's a flow chart. I'm happy if after having taken a glance at it, you want to ask questions, we can dive right back into it. So the deposit is placed, I think, as you mostly all know, there is a deposit in the bottle bill on each can that is sold, that is subject to the bottle bill. This expands the scope of cans that or containers that are covered. The one sort of change the agency has some concerns with is there's a proposal in the draft that would require the deposit to go from 5 to 10 cents if 2 years of performance goals fail to be reached. We have concerns with that for two basic reasons. One is there are lots of tools the agency has to increase collection and redemption under the bottle bill. We can require the consumer organization to do more collection, have more collection centers, do more education and outreach. We're concerned that using the deposit increase as sort of the only mechanism and sort of a non-discretionary mechanism is both confining and also potentially impacts Vermonters as far as having an additional deposit. The other is doubling the deposit is a significant policy change, and it's one that frankly the agency is uncomfortable being delegated without any sort of oversight by the General Assembly, to be honest. So we, in the bill as it was introduced, there was a requirement that if the producer responsibility organization failed to meet its obligations to meet those performance targets, that we were reporting back to the General Assembly along with recommendations on what steps should be taken, either an increase in the deposit or sort of other alternatives to increase collection and meet those performance goals. And the agency would like to go back to that original recommendation that was in H-158 as introduced. So that's sort of the first component. The second, just to make the committee aware, the funding approach that is used in H158 is a bill back approach. So rather than assessing a fee, it allows the agency to bill the producer responsibility organization for the costs that we have, including personnel costs and any oversight costs that we have. So it's a different approach than a fee-based approach. It does bring in revenue. It would need to be a part of the normal budgeting process when the program starts up. So it would be in the agency's recommended budget when the program starts. I think it's at the outset of the program, we don't foresee any immediate needs in FY24. And I think that we can evaluate where we are going into FY25 and build any needs into the FY25 budget next session.
I think this committee is generally comfortable with like historically, not folks in the room right now, bill backs mechanism all through state government. Usually there's some parameters around bill backs, especially with DEC. And this, as drafted, has no parameters on the bill backs whatsoever. And that, I think, creates a lot of instability between, for the private sector. So would really appreciate your advice on how the bill back parameters could be clarified.
Well, so I think if you look through, there's another extended producer responsibility program for the collection of electronic waste. Mm-hmm. And so in that program, there's also a bill back provision that applies to those manufacturers. We basically are authorized to bill our actual and direct costs back to those manufacturers. I don't believe that there are any sort of guardrails or oversights on that one either, but I mean, I'm certainly happy if that's a concern of the committee to think about how, what sort of the appropriate parameters are and provide something today or tomorrow to you. I will try and do that. I will try and do that.
Appreciate that.
So the last area that I heard the committee had an interest in was the impact on Clean Water Fund. So so let me just sort of lay out a few assumptions and estimates. We don't have the math on this, and I apologize about that. We don't have sort of like a firm fiscal estimate, but generally speaking, we expect that the expansion of the bottle bill will double the amount of containers coming into the system, which again, I think that the assumptions are that actually in the first couple years of expansion, the Clean Water Fund will likely see an increase in the amount of funding. And the reason for that is that the expanded containers are normally redeemed in lower percentages than the ones that have historically been redeemed, right? So there'll be more unredeemed containers going into the recycling system that have deposits on them, therefore more escheats going back to the Clean Water Fund. That will go down over time, right? Because this bill mandates that the system improve, right? So that more containers get redeemed, therefore there will be fewer unclaimed deposits going to the Clean Water Fund. I mean, I had a chance to talk with Secretary Moore briefly about this. I mean, the Clean Water Fund is built on sort of a 3 funding source approach. This has always been the smallest of the 3 funding sources. And I think there's an appreciation that, we wouldn't want the Clean Water Fund to rest upon a not well-functioning system, right? The goal is to make the bottle bill function as well as it can so that we don't have sort of unredeemed deposits sort of sitting out there. So I think the other aspect of this bill is that it in the first sort of startup years takes half of those escheats and allows the PRO to retain those escheats for starting the system up. Generally speaking, we think that's appropriate. It shouldn't have an adverse impact on the Clean Water Fund because you're doubling the amount. And if you take half of doubling, at least again, in rough proportions, there shouldn't be an impact. And there are likely to be significant startup costs associated with with expanding the system the way that it's proposed in H158.
Think of this, I guess, sort of two questions. One, it would be great to sort of reconcile JFO's estimates with yours so that we have clarity about, their estimates. I don't think expected that sort of increase in the sheets. I guess I'd also like to, and maybe this is a better question for the PROs than you, but do we have a sense of what the infrastructure costs will be to help support the redemption system, and whether the 50% of the sheets is equivalent to what those expected costs are, or less or more?
I think it is better to hear from the PRO or folks representing the beverage distributors than me. I think it's probably fair to say that there's the bottle bill, the way it currently exists right now, is it doesn't have sort of a sort of central or governing, ethos to ensure that cans get collected, or that collection points happen where we want them to happen, right? And so there's going to be a need for investing broader collection network, and frankly, so that there's a better sort of technological way that we're dealing with this, because hand sorting cans is not necessarily the most efficient or best way all the time to deal in all places to deal with these things. So.
Yeah, so I would love an answer to that question.
Sure, and I will defer. I will defer to other witnesses on that. I mean, they are more likely to have a better understanding of system costs and implications, and what might be contemplated as part of something like this.
And how it relates to the current proposal.
Absolutely.
Representative Anthony?
Thank you. I wanted to go back to your earlier issue, which is a combination of unease with the trigger to raise or double, as you put it, the redemption deposit. And your implication was that you didn't have other levers to pull to, if you will, enforce or encourage or see to it that the targets are met. I'm sort of puzzled by that. Is there no the general authority to discharge those duties?
No, thank you for the question, and let me clarify my response. So we do have other authority, but the way the bill is currently drafted, if there are 2 consecutive years where the target is not met, then the deposit goes to 10 cents, sort of, and there is no discretion in that. We couldn't say, well, rather than doing that, why don't you increase by 20% the number of collection facilities located throughout the state, thereby driving the number up.
So if I could, it's not that you don't have other levers, it's just you don't like the levers that are in there now.
Well, again, I think it's the difference between having a mandatory provision versus having discretion over looking at a number of different options to reach the same ultimate policy result.
Matt, could you repeat again for us how it was introduced, the language?
Sure. I mean, basically what it required the agency to report back to the General Assembly. So if that performance measure wasn't met, it required A&R to report that it wasn't met and our recommendations to the General Assembly. And it very well could be that we recommend going up to 10 cents, but there could be other sort of proposals that would come along with that.
Thank you.
I had once upon a time in a previous discussion said, to leave this more an open question, whether mandatory, we could have structured the language so that the secretary had to essentially say that the targets were met. In the absence of some affirmative statement, the default would be that the deposit would go up to trigger. And so in that case, the secretary would come in and say, by the way, I know we're not meeting the second year, but I have ways, if you will, to remedy that. And so it's not automatic, but it is a default if the secretary simply doesn't come in and explain how the targets will be met, even if they're not being met currently.
I don't know that I don't know whether there was a question. I mean, I don't know that what you're recommending, Representative, is substantially different than where the agency is at. I mean, I think that the real concern is just both the ensuring that there are more tools than just the deposit that get put on the table. And also, I think the concern, as I said, that this is a fairly significant policy choice that normally you don't delegate to state agencies, and we have some concern about it.
Representative Taylor?
Two questions. The PRO for the electronic waste, was that set up? I don't know anything about that. Is that within the state or was it set up by the manufacturers or, because we're trying to do that again?
So it's different. I mean, all of these models are very similar, but they have their own unique aspects to them. The way the PRO for electronics waste, the way electronics waste works is that basically the agency administers the system through a contract and bills the manufacturers for the service that gets provided. So we actually have a much more active role in the management of the system.
So you're kind of assuming the role of
we are the PRO in that instance, yes.
I see. And was there, I don't know enough about the bill at that time, but
Sure.
Was there an option for the manufacturers to form one on their own?
There actually is. There's an opt-out provision within that allows the manufacturers to not participate in the state.
No, but I mean at the very beginning, when this bill says, if the manufacturers are supposed to form their own PRO.
Yes.
If they don't, the state will.
Correct.
Was that the same for that one or?
No, it flips it on its head. It says that the state is required to have this contract out there, but it allows for the manufacturers, if they don't like the state program, to do their own.
Oh, okay. My second question, you mentioned with the increase from 5 to 10 cents that you didn't like it because it impacts Vermonters. I'm just trying to understand how the logic behind it. I just never been explained.
Sure. I mean, I think that, again, it goes back to really the unclaimed deposits and the impact on unclaimed deposits, right? I think the impact it depends on how you want to look at the deposit, right? I mean, the deposit is money that I put to a container that I can redeem at the time that I go and redeem that container. If I don't redeem that container, then I escheat that money to the state for the Clean Water Fund. So there is an impact. I will let people evaluate the scope of that impact.
Okay. But you were referring to the impact on the consumer of
the
beverage.
container.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. Oh,
Can
sorry.
I get that last thought that you had? I'm taking notes, thinking I'm getting this, but you're not comfortable with 10 cents because of the impact on the consumer. What?
I'm not comfortable for the impact primarily it's a big policy decision that you normally retain for yourself, and that I want to have more options as an administrative agency than just the 10 cents. I think everything else is frankly, they are minor considerations, but not central to the concerns that the agency has.
Okay. That's what you feel uncomfortable with.
Yes.
Check back provision.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ms. Deely?
Good morning, Chair Gomez and members of the committee. Thank you for having me up, and I appreciate the timing following that. It's very helpful. My name is Bree Deatley. I'm a consultant. I work for myself. I have a firm in Somerville, Massachusetts. I'm an environmental consultant, and I work for the Beverage Association of Vermont, which is who I'm representing today. Those are the soft drink bottlers and distributors in Vermont. So Coca-Cola Northeast, Pepsi Beverages in Burlington, Leader Distribution down in Brattleboro, and Polar Beverages. I also have a different hat, although I'm not officially wearing it today, and that is that I manage the commingling group that currently operates and manages about 90% of the returns in Vermont. I'm the business manager for the distributors, which I guess you could view as something of a prototype for the stewardship organization that's proposed and that we are supporting as part of this legislation. I think it's important to highlight and talk a little bit briefly about the stewardship organization and use that as my entry point to talk about kind of the two key issues here, which are the unclaimed deposits and the 10-cent deposit and its transition and timing as Matt just introduced. With regard to the stewardship organization, the commingling organization was formed back in 2008, really at a very similar juncture to where we are today, not because expansion was being contemplated at that time, although it certainly had been raised, but just because the system was having a lot of operational problems. There was too much sorting going on. There was sort of a lot of issues with responsibility for pickups and things like that. And the distributors worked voluntarily to form an organization across not only the Beverage Association, but also the beer wholesalers, to form an entity that would coordinate a lot of that work. And it eliminated probably 80 to 90% of the sorting that was going on manually at the redemption centers. All of the brands that we cover are all sorted into the same bags and picked up by the same pickup agent. So that reduces the effort that the redemption centers have in the process, easing the burden on them, reducing their costs, and then easing the need for increases in the handling fee over time. So now, as we look at this point where the legislation considers expanding the law, our involvement last year with Senator Bray and his committee was a process of saying, hang on, we've still got those under the hood problems with the system, and they've magnified because there are so many more brands. And now you're talking about expansion, and that's going to be a real crisis for the system. So let's look at real reforms for that system. Let's look at what kind of the rest of the world has been doing. And that is the use of sort of this centralized organization or a stewardship organization, which, you know, we anticipate the commingling group would be the core of moving forward and establishing that entity. Now, a couple of things about that entity. That entity would be structured as a nonprofit. It would be transparent to the state. We'd be filing reports. You would know where money is going, where money is coming in, where money is going out. There'd be transparency in the performance of the system. The entity would be reporting on how well the system is functioning, where the access points are for redemption, what the return rates are. It's all information that is really not centralized, not available, not transparent today in the system. And that frankly makes it hard to manage the system from our perspective and to know how it's doing, but it also makes it hard to know exactly, you know, how much the system costs. So I want to talk about these two issues. First, the unclaimed deposits. We certainly appreciate the recognition that the organization is going to have significant expenses. The organization obviously has to be set up and structured. We'll have administrative expenses, but we're talking, as Matt said, about significant updates in how redemption happens in Vermont. That means adopting technology for sorting, high-speed sorting of material that is collected sort of in a decentralized way from redemption centers, brought to a centralized location and then scanned and sorted so that you know whose responsibility it is. If you've got 400 brands represented in a bag of cans, you need to run that through a scanner someplace that's going to tell you who's responsible for each one of those cans and who needs to pay the bills for those containers. But that doesn't have to happen right at the place where you drop your bottles and cans off at the redemption center, and they look at each one and decide which bin it goes into. That's a little bit too 19th century to try to continue to maintain in Vermont. So there's going to be investments in technology, both at the point of redemption and back sort of behind the wall, if you will. And that kind of investment, as well as investments in data management and tracking for these systems, you need to sort of cohesively bring together all of the distributors, especially all the new manufacturers that will come into the system under expansion, most of which are outside of Vermont. All of that needs to be brought together in databases to move forward. Now, what we're looking to do, and realize this is not what's in the bill, but we continue to ask that the unclaimed deposits be transferred to the stewardship organization in their entirety from the inception of the program for 5 years. So rather than 50% of the unclaimed deposits moving to the organization, that all of the unclaimed deposits go to the organization for that transition period, and then we revert back to 50% after that. It's the cost of running the system today in Vermont is about $10 million, give or take. That's the cost of paying the various mandated fees and operating costs of the system. The unclaimed deposits are running right now at a fairly high level, higher than they've been, certainly higher than they were when the Clean Environment Fund or when the Clean Water Fund was set up, and this was set up as a funding source. Our members on an accrual basis at least had about 2.9 million in unclaimed deposits last year. So the unclaimed deposits today don't come even close to covering the cost of the current system. If just taking Matt's rough numbers, I don't think that the number of containers will fully double under expansion, but they will go up significantly. The cost of the system will certainly double because of the fact that the new containers are more expensive to handle. Unclaimed deposits still won't come close to covering the cost of operating the system even today, without looking at the expense of these new capital investments and the new technology that needs to be put in place. So, you know, we're not looking to capture additional revenue to somehow make this into a profitable or even a break-even venture. This is still going to be a significant out-of-pocket expense for distributors and manufacturers, but we recognize that there is going to be a real surge in expense in those early days of setting up the system. And having the resources, frankly, as virtually every other redemption system in the world does. There are very few systems in the world that don't plow the unclaimed deposits from consumers back into deferring the cost of operating and investing in the system. In fact, Massachusetts and Vermont are the only two states in the country where no money goes back into the system from the unclaimed deposits. And if you look outside of the United States, you know, virtually every other system in the world returns those funds to a stewardship organization or something similar. And again, I want to emphasize sort of the transparency around this organization. There won't be any sort of hiding the bacon with this group. It's a nonprofit. They'll be filing annual reports with DC, and you'll be seeing sort of how those funds are used. So let me move off of the unclaimed deposit point and just touch briefly on Matt's point about the 10-cent deposit. We too are extremely uncomfortable with the automatic trigger to the 10-cent deposit for a couple of reasons. One, and couldn't agree more with Matt's comment, you know, there are more tools in the tool chest than simply raising the deposit to improve the performance of the system. The stewardship organization is going to be held to meeting goals. The stewardship organization have a lot of options in terms of dialing up its promotions, doing incentive payments, working with retailers and others to incentivize redemption, adding locations, modifying locations, trying to sort of meet the consumer more where they're at instead of sort of how we've traditionally done it in Vermont. So we would like that flexibility, and we know that the redemption rates are going to suffer when the law is expanded. It always takes time for consumers to get used to the fact that there are new containers subject to deposit. We know the rates are going to dip. So we're essentially guaranteeing ourselves the trigger to the 10 cent because we're measuring the performance of the system right as we're dumping extra containers into the system. So we sort of know that's not going to work. I would say too that as producers and as distributors and really as affiliated with our retail customers, we're extremely concerned about the impact of the 10 cents on our businesses and on our retail customer businesses. You know, we already know there's a vast amount of a business that gets shipped out of Vermont where consumers leave the state to buy product. That has a big impact on our businesses, on our state revenues, on our tax revenues that we pay to the state. If the deposit doubles, business is going to continue to flow even more out of the state. That's going to hurt our businesses. It's going to hurt our customers. And we also have always lurking in the background the specter of redemption and fraudulent redemption. We already wrestle with significant flows of materials out of the neighboring states, especially New Hampshire, across the Connecticut River, coming into Vermont, being paid refunds for which no deposit was ever collected. That's going to have a direct fiscal impact on the stewardship organization, on businesses in Vermont. Doubling the deposit just, again, tease it up for a significant increase in that fraudulent redemption that, you know, we don't want to encourage that. It's already bad enough at 5 cents. If it goes to 10, then we have to worry not only about the New Hampshire border, but about New York and Massachusetts too, because everybody can make money by bringing their containers into Vermont. So those two key issues for us: retaining full control of the unclaimed deposits for an interim of 5 years, and eliminating that automatic trigger to the 10 cents and having that as Matt said, more of as a last resort if the collaboration between DEC, stewardship organization, and other stakeholders can't kind of come up with a better solution. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Hey, Bree, thank you so much for coming in today. I think I heard you say that when you take on new types of containers, that they will be more costly to process. Could you say more about that? Like, why was that the case?
Sure. There's a couple of things there. One is that the number of brands and types of containers and materials and just people that you have to deal with are many more, and each of them sells fewer containers. So you get a lot more manufacturers involved who are selling fewer containers. So you have a lot of scale problems in dealing with somebody who's maybe only selling 20 or 30,000 bottles or cans in the state every year, but you still have the same sort of administrative and procedural costs with them. They're their own sort. Under today's laws, they would still be their own sort at a redemption center. So there's a sort of an administrative issue with that. These tend to be national, regional manufacturers of juices and teas and things like that that are not distributed and manufactured the way beer and soft drinks are, carbonated soft drinks are. There's also much greater variety in the types of containers that they sell, a greater range of sizes. There's much more standardization in the sizes and container types that the soda companies and the beer companies sell. But if you walk down the juice aisle, if you walk down that sort of non-carbonated beverage aisle at the grocery store, you see plastic containers with like handles molded into the side of them, and you see things in all different shapes. You see different plastics, not just PET, the number 1 plastic, but you see number 2 HDPE. You see chilled juices in the coolers that are in HDPE and other plastic containers. All those have to be handled separately. They're less valuable commodities in general to manage, so they raise the cost of handling. So just the diversity in the system of the types and brands and sort of cats and dogs that you have to wrangle in the system expands quite a bit with expansion. It's one of the reasons that we as an industry and the commingling group have opposed expansion traditionally, is that we knew the system wasn't ready for that kind of an expansion, of an explosion really of administrative and just operational complication.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and your help with this.
Thank you. Appreciate your time, and thank you.
Mr. Knoll, hello. Is it Noel, Knoll? I guess you're about to introduce yourself and we'll find out. Welcome.
Yeah, you got it right the second time, Noel, just like Christmas. Is it okay if I share slides? Is that possible?
It is. Just give us 1 second.
Yeah, I guess while we're getting that set up, I do apologize. Directly above me, like right here, they appear to be building Rome in a day. So you might get a few things and stalls and stuff like that. So it's not too bad though, but just giving you forewarning. Let's see here. Right.
If you could introduce yourself for the record as you get started, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, so hi everybody, I'm Mike Noel. I am a public affairs director for TOMRA. I'll explain a bit about us in a second. I appreciate you inviting TOMRA to testify here. I'll jump right in because I'm trying to keep this at 10 minutes. So I'll talk about TOMRA and a bit about who we are, so you understand where we're coming from. I'll share the basic benefits of a deposit system or why they are being adopted around the world. And I'll spend some time explaining how the highest performing deposit refund systems, or bottle bills as they're known, operate, and how this bill stacks up against that. And then if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about the implementation of this bill and how we see it playing out. So TOMRA has 5 decades of experience in deposit refund systems, including being active in every state with the deposit law, and every major jurisdiction around the world that does have such a system. Every year we collect about 40 billion cans and bottles annually. And in Vermont, as well as the rest of the Northeast, we are active in every link of the deposit value chain. We have a number of business areas in these recycling systems. So we provide reverse vending machines where you can put in one container or an entire bag of containers at once to get your deposit back. We provide service for these machines. We provide a clearinghouse service for the deposits and handling fees, as well as a data management process, a bit about which Ms. Deatley was talking about with managing product registration and all the various barcodes in the system. If a beverage company does not want to go around to every redemption location to pick up their own deposit containers, they can hire a contractor such as Tomra to do that on their behalf. And so that's what we do. At the moment, we're the primary pickup provider in Vermont. After that, we bring them to our facility in Essex, Vermont, where 15 of my colleagues will break open the material, sort them by material and color further, bale them, and sell them back to recyclers. It's either most of it goes to the Essex facility, but some does go to one of our 5 processing facilities in New York State. And then we sell this material in bulk on behalf of the beverage industry back to recyclers. So those are our business lines. In terms of deposit refund systems, the real purpose of them, the main one, which you're probably familiar with, is achieving superior collection rates for recycling. And that's important because you can't recycle what you don't collect in the first place. So the Container Recycling Institute analyzed Vermont's most recent waste characterization study from 2018, and that showed that 36% of containers were collected for recycling in the curbside or drop-off system in Vermont that year. It's 2018. That same year, 78% of containers with a 5-cent deposit were collected for recycling in the deposit system, and 81% of containers with a 15-cent deposit were collected for recycling. And just to compare this with the 2 US states that currently have a flat 10-cent deposit value, Michigan and Oregon, and on average, they have an 88% redemption rate as of 2019. So really, you're roughly doubling the collection rate for recycling. And that's important because the beverage industry has set targets for the amount of recycled content they want to use in their packaging. And states are increasingly setting standards or requirements to use a certain amount of recycled material. And you need more supply in order to reach those targets. So to zoom out for a second, there's about 40 to 50 deposit systems in existence today. Not all are reaching their potential, or some of them were, not anymore. But if you look at those systems on the left here that are achieving around 90% collection rate for recycling or more, you find that generally they prioritize 5 principles to design their program. And so what I'll do now is kind of go through those, highlight a few of the elements, and see how this bill stacks up against that. So first, the high-performing programs prioritize performance. They really have a zero in on what they want to achieve. Second, they promote or prioritize circularity. The whole goal is to make sure that the material is recycled and cycled as many times as possible. Third is convenience. If you're going to put a deposit on an item, it needs to be convenient for the public to get their deposit back. Fourth, there's a thoughtful design of the system between the producers, the manufacturers, retailers, and the state and redemption centers. And then finally, system integrity is all about setting incentives and rules to make sure that the system is trusted by the different stakeholders. And I'll highlight a few of probably the most important elements here to evaluate the current bill. So the first principle around performance, these high-performing programs set a meaningful deposit value. You know, we want to make sure that the public is engaged, that they're actually returning containers. In the US, that's generally considered 10 cents today due to the data I showed earlier. These systems set a broad scope of beverages, meaning, you know, most containers sold are eligible for a deposit refund. And importantly, they set performance targets. This is what you want to see this program achieve, say X percentage of containers returned for recycling. And H158 ticks the box on all 3 of these key elements. The second principle is convenience. We want to make sure that deposit is a true deposit and is not a tax. It's hard or a hassle for the public to get their money back. A key focus of this is making sure that returning a container is as easy as buying the container in the first place. So retailers play a key role in these high-performing systems. H158 provides a convenience standard in the bill. It's requirements for the producer responsibility organization to make sure that there's a number of redemption locations per county and municipality. And it also raises the handling fee, or the bill raises the handling fee on some containers. Between that and making more containers eligible for a deposit refund, we would expect entrepreneurs in the state to open up more redemption centers just on their own, because there's now a market for recycling. And then finally, large and medium retailers will continue to play an important role in providing convenient access, or at least that's how this bill envisions it. And then finally, system management. A key element here in the high-performing system is making sure that the unredeemed deposits and the revenue from the collected, container commodities are reinvested in the system. So this bill allows the commodity revenues to remain with producers, and I would say it takes a positive steps towards allowing the unredeemed deposits revenue to be shared with producers. Based on the high-performing programs, we would like to see all of that shared with the producers to be making sure it's reinvested in the program. But that's up to you all to decide. And then last element is whether the system is centrally managed through a producer responsibility organization or decentralized. Either way, there are clear roles and responsibilities defined in the bill. And I would say that there are requirements specified in this bill for the producer responsibility organization for, reporting and convenience and things like that. And then there are enforcement measures included, which would have the intention of this bill actually realized. And then if you want, I'm happy to stop there, but if you want, I can also talk about some common concerns around sorting and space concerns for retailers or redemption centers upon expansion, or addressing some concerns around cross-border unauthorized redemption or fraud, if you would like.
We have a question.
Do you consider TOMRA to be the PRO in this case, or is the PRO working with TOMRA?
You mean today, or as this bill envisioned?
The way that this is envisioned, I guess.
No, in this case, it would be the producers would pay into a producer responsibility organization, forming a new entity. TOMRA operates a bit like a PRO today in the absence of such a centralized entity. But, in this case, we've made significant investments in that facility in Essex, as I mentioned, in providing most of the pickup in the state. So we would envision probably being a service provider for this producer responsibility organization. Certainly we're going to provide technology to this group. We hope we're one of many, technology vendors. And I'm sure we'll have some partnership on the data management process, but no, it's two distinct entities. We're kind of a service provider. This would be a new entity, the producer responsibility organization.
So the PRO you would get income from the products that you're processing and selling back as commodity, and you would get some income from the producer responsibility organization that's hiring you as a service. Is that correct then?
Sure. So there's a different business model for each of these business lines I mentioned here. So, for the reverse vending machines, it's typically we will, charge a small fee for each container that goes through the machines in order to pay off the machine. For container pickup, we would charge the producer responsibility organization per unit or per ton of material. And same thing from the material processing and brokerage businesses.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure.
Quick question about the reverse vending machines. As we imagine new types of containers, do those machines, are they configured to accept these, varying containers, or are they really more just geared for like your typical cans that you see now?
Great question. This was a big concern we had last year with the bill. They are configured to handle the containers that are placed in this bill, so to speak. And the key part there is setting a maximum size limit. So the bill would set, I think, a size limit of 2.5 liters for non-carbonated containers and up to and including 3 liters for carbonated containers. And we recommended that because in our experience, some of the container sizes that are larger than that, might be a huge juice container with a huge handle on it, and it simply won't fit in a reverse vending machine or in the processing equipment that is on the back end to count and verify that container. So, and we're actually going through a very similar experience in Connecticut right now, which did expand to a very similar universe of containers that is being debated in Vermont now. And we're having, it's going smoothly so far where these containers are starting to be redeemed. I should say, just to clarify, wine and liquor are not in Connecticut's expansion. But RVMs are capable of accepting them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Mr. Bullock? Oh, I think it's, hello, welcome. Ooh. If you could unmute yourself, that would, and then there are some wild things happening with your video. Ah, there we go. Okay, hello.
Hi. Sorry I'm late.
Mr. Tomasi, we're actually going to hear from Mr. Bullock and then Ms. Crosby, and then I think you are last on the list if you don't mind, if that works for you.
That's quite all right.
Great.
I'll mute myself and watch.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And if you could actually turn off your video as well, that would be probably make your time easier. Mr. Bullock, hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. So I have a business in Rutland, probably one of the maybe 2 or 3 largest redemption centers in southern Vermont. I work, I'm serviced out of Rotterdam rather than Essex. And I was fortunate enough to have Mr. Canfield at my business a couple days ago. And I just, I can offer, I would consider myself an expert at the redemption business. And I take in about 20,000 containers a day, very efficient operation. And handling the expansion, on the part, of redemption centers is, easy. I explained to Mr. Canfield how requiring so much less sorting requires so much less floor space that any additional business, if we hypothetically double our container count, then, we have the floor space to store it. And Tomra, I have a good relationship with Tomra. They pick me up twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. They're there at 5 in the morning. And, it may require 1 more pickup a week, but it just really makes sense. I showed Mr. Canfield, actually, he saw a lot of containers came in while he was there that, that just end up, we hope they get recycled, in the zero sort system, but they're just going with my, with my trash. I bet there was just 1 bag, there's probably 100 containers in there. The expansion makes sense. Looking at the success rate that I think Mr. Noel, was that his name? Yeah, Noel. 78% is pretty good. The 5 cents, 10 cents, I guess that's, again, your decision. But, if we can get it up, keep it at that 80%, I think it's a good, it seems the system seems to be working. But it is just, there was a bus stop, in a letter I had written to the other committee. It's just, I'll watch people, get on the local bus across the street and they'll just, if they'll have a bottle of water in their hands, they just throw it on the ground. And I know there's a process, that 5 years or 4 years, but the water is the most important thing. I sell, my store sells 50 cases of water a week, so that's, 500, 600 containers that are going out of here that, I just, don't have high confidence that those are ever making it back, that they're ending up in a landfill. So, really that was all, I was, willing to offer, and the fact that, redemption centers, in Rutland, I think there's 5 or 6, there's certainly, if the containers are expanded, I think it is a business that, you'll see some people open up because it doesn't take a college education. It doesn't take a lot of money. Basically, it takes effort, effort and some space.
We have a question for you.
Do redemption centers at all, do they do any crushing, or do you, and therefore mess up the barcode, or do you have to forward the full bottle?
Well, and it's interesting because I have looked, Tomra does have some good machines, and I traveled to Plattsburgh, New York. I traveled up, somewhere above Stowe, traveled over to New York to check out some of their machines. One of them's $200,000, another one's $750,000. They will not take a crushed can. And at my window, I will not accept a crushed can, because when it ends up going to Tomra and it goes through their, high-speed sorters, it can't get counted because it doesn't, only if it's completely crushed. If it's just dented and the barcode is still intact, then it's not an issue at all.
Okay, good, thank you.
And sure. Hi, JR. Do you see a problem with Tomra being able to come an extra time per week to collect from you?
Tomra gets paid based on the containers they pick up. So theoretically, if there's more business, it's they're making money picking them up. If they need to throw another trailer on the road, like as I discussed with you the other day, right now they, I'm still staying busy, fortunately, but they've their drivers taking Thursdays off, because it's slower now. But I don't foresee a problem with Tomra.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming and testifying this morning. Do you have any objection or see any problem if we were to go right off to 10 cents?
I wouldn't have any objection to it. I think it would more incentivize people to bring your containers back for return. That's the whole intent. And with expanding this, people aren't, you go to other states that don't have deposit, like New Hampshire, and the roads are littered with containers, and it's a source of income. I probably have 5 or 6 customers a day, that's what they do. They go around and they, hate to say it, but, they have to go through trash cans and pick out the empties and then bring them in for money. So, I guess it doesn't matter to me either way. I think the good thing is that it would more incentivize people to do the right thing to get their money back.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome. And thanks again, Mr. Canfield, for surprising me the other day. I knew Steve was coming, but I didn't know you were coming.
Yeah, we made a tag team visit.
Well, thank you.
Next up, we have Ms. Crosby. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I was looking on the screen and then I remember there was someone in the corner that I couldn't quite see. Hi, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. For the record, my name is Kim Crosby. I'm the Director of Compliance for Casella Waste Systems, also based out of Rutland. So Casella operates the materials recycling facility in Williston through a contract with the Chittenden County Solid Waste District. And we own and operate the recycling facility in Rutland. And I think it's important to note that the plastic, the PET that we're talking about in this bill, the cans, the aluminum cans, and the glass, most of the glass, most of the cans and most of the PET are made into bottles again. So we're using essentially the same markets that the bottle bill uses for our material. Both recycling facilities charge a tip fee, or like a user fee for every ton of material that enters the facility. And our tip fee in Rutland fluctuates with the commodities market. So when the commodities market is doing good, the tip fee is lower. When it's bad, the tip fee goes up. So to give you an example, 40% of the material that comes into the recycling facilities is mixed paper. And from last October until this month, mixed paper sold for nothing. It had zero value per ton. It's up to $5 a ton now. PET is currently worth $277 a ton, and aluminum is worth $1,500 a ton. So these commodities change on a monthly basis. So bottle bills threaten the economic viability of recycling facilities when they skim off a portion of these valuable recycling streams. While PET and aluminum represent a small portion of the material that we process in comparison to the total amount we receive, their value helps offset the processing costs for the lower value materials like mixed paper. So when recycling facilities lose more of the valuable material to the bottle bill system, they must raise their fees in order to make up for the loss in revenue. So we've determined that the cost of recycling could increase to all Vermonters by approximately 7%, which would equate to about an additional $10 per ton on top of our current tip fee. These estimates are dependent upon the current state of the commodities market, which, as I said earlier, they change monthly. These increases in recycling would impact the state of Vermont's waste and recycling budget. Municipalities, schools, colleges, hospitals, haulers, everybody, all of whom are required to recycle by law, and many of which are already suffering financially from inflation. I'm trying to keep it down to what you think is most interesting. I crossed off a lot of stuff. I just think it's important to cover the universal recycling law, give a little background, and go over some of the investments that Casella has made into the law, to implementing the law. So in addition to mandating that all Vermonters recycle, the universal recycling law requires transfer stations and drop-offs to collect recycling, requires recycling receptacles in public spaces, and requires solid waste haulers to provide recycling services to all new and existing customers. The most efficient and economical way for haulers to provide mandatory curbside recycling services is through single stream collection. Single stream is also the most convenient option for Vermonters, and convenience was deemed as one of the most important factors in encouraging Vermonters to recycle more and throw away less. For these reasons, many communities throughout the country have modified their recycling programs to the single stream model. Many Vermonters like the convenience of single stream, which is why we see material that is currently in the bottle bill system today at our recycling facilities. So since the passage of the universal recycling law, which was in 2012, Casella has made the following investments. In 2011, we invested approximately $3.7 million to convert the recycling facility in Rutland to process single stream. In 2018, we invested an additional $1.3 million into technology to improve the quality of our paper and glass streams. In 2021, Casella invested another $4 million into a depackaging facility in Williston to separate organic material from its packaging, and we're recycling some of the packaging that's going through that facility today, which includes aluminum cans and plastic. In the fall of 2022, we invested $1.4 million into our Rutland facility for the installation of robotics that operate on artificial intelligence. I don't know if you saw CAX did a segment on it, and they also were discussing this morning about artificial intelligence used in healthcare, so it's an upcoming technology. The robotics help improve sortation, capture more recyclable material, and compensate for the lack of the labor that's out there. This recycling, whether it's sorting bottles or sorting single stream, are not highly sought after jobs. And even if we fill a position, the people just don't last. And then in December 2022, we invested and successfully secured grant funding through the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation's Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Trust for the purchase of an electric refuse truck. It's the first electric truck in Vermont. The truck is operating in the Rutland area and is equipped for collecting waste and recycling simultaneously. By switching one truck from diesel to electric, we expect to conserve over 7,500 gallons of diesel fuel a year, eliminate over 78 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year, which is equivalent to taking about 16 passenger vehicles off the road. These investments total to approximately $11 million, and that number does not include the investments we and other haulers and solid waste management entities made into additional collection vehicles and containers to implement the law. So Section 7 of H-158 as currently written requires that the Agency of Natural Resources submit a report to the House Committee on Environment and Energy and the Senate Natural Resource Committee by January 15, 25. The report shall include an estimate of the total system cost and savings associated with an expanded system, study climate impacts to recycling systems, an estimate of the cost of operating a redemption center, impacts to the recycling rates, and impacts to the Clean Water Fund. What we think is missing from the bill is what happens if the report comes back showing that expansion of the bottle bill system has negative impacts to any one of these number of items that are listed in the current bill. Does expansion still proceed if it's a negative impact to any of these, or does it get evaluated and reconsidered, or what happens? That's really all I wanted to share today. I have a lot more, but I shared that with the former committee, so.
Representative Odie, Brannigan, Melton.
Thank you very much. The grant money from DEC, that was, how much money was that?
So we put in, I'd say like it was probably a matching grant fund. I don't know if you know how much that was. I don't know off the top of my head either, but I'd say a new refuse truck, it took a long time to get the truck because of the supply chain. New trucks are usually around $500,000, $700,000. They're expensive.
Do you happen to know how much money that DEC gives out in grants from that fund?
That would be a question for Matt. Yeah, I don't know.
I do not know how much comes out of the Volkswagen settlement fund annually in grant funds. I know that it's been used for electric buses and other similar things, but I can't tell you what the annual grant amount is.
I would like to know that.
Yeah. Carol, you could ask someone at JFO.
Oh, JFO.
Or if DEC could look into that, that would be great. Representative Brannigan?
Can you give me an example of what a negative impact would be? You have a good point about what do we do if this isn't working well?
So what if
how would we know that it isn't working well?
What if there are negative impacts to the recycling systems? What if there are negative impacts to the climate?
Such as?
Increase in greenhouse gas emissions from additional trucks on the road for picking up additional containers, additional trips from people returning containers. I know that some people have said that they go to the transfer station with their garbage and then they redeem on the way home, but that's not the case for everybody. A lot of people have curbside recycling services and would have to make a special trip. And that was done in a DSM study in 2006. And I would hope that data would be updated as part of this report that's going to be done by the agency.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, Representative Asplund, no.
Either way. Couple of things. One is, I think we appreciate the things that you're trying to do above and beyond.
Yep.
Kind of stuff. And it's nice to see you in person because we've emailed once in a while.
Yes, we have.
Over a couple of years.
Yeah.
And in regards to when we reconsider, that's what we do in this building all the time, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth. We
Yeah.
Make adjustments and move on. And so, anyway, but you raise an interesting contradiction, not yourself. Well, you're making us aware of an essential contradiction on recycling in terms of getting more product into the system so that it can be made into more soda bottles. Versus keeping your business viable, because they're in conflict with each other, those things.
These two systems are parallel recycling systems that compete with each other.
And
Yes.
we're aware of that, and I don't have an answer today. I was thinking during testimony this morning about, I live on the Connecticut River, people can go to West Lebanon and do anyway, and buy a case of water or whatever like that. Why on earth don't they just use the well water, but I don't know. But people will continue to go to West Lebanon and buy a case of water, and some people will use that as a incentive to take home a dime, or they take home a nickel or something. But the point being, that thing in itself raises this essential contradiction. Are we doing this so we can recycle, or are we doing this to support a recycling program?
Yeah, I think.
And I don't have an easy answer.
Yeah, one of the studies that DSM did for the agency showed that expanding the bottle bill was only going to achieve a 1% diversion of landfill material. So it's not a high, a lot of money for a real small return.
If that's
in fact
available, I think we'd like to look at it. It's at the moment, I'm certainly in favor of getting more clean material to bottle manufacturers to be reused 70 times or something. But
well, so some of the bottle bill manufacturers, not all, but some prefer to buy material from MRFs because it costs less. The yield might be a little less, but it's cheaper than the bottle bill material because the bottle bill material costs more to collect.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
My understanding was less about a desire for diversion and more about a desire for the cleaner glass that comes from the bottle bill. Representative Beck.
Yeah, two questions, Kim. First is I have, in my district, I have two towns that are part of Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District. And then one town, St. Johnsbury's, Casella. Casella has a transfer station there. If Casella is no longer able to get this high value PET aluminum, how does that affect the recycling rates that my constituents are going to pay at each of those facilities?
Yeah, from a cost perspective, they would see an increase.
One's owned by Casella, one is not owned by Casella.
Both would see an increase because they're both using the same facilities to recycle the material in the end, right?
Okay. And my second question is, I don't know how long have you been involved in this industry in Vermont?
15 years.
Okay, so you were here when the universal recycling law went through, and I was not in the legislature at that time. Did we have this same conversation at that point in time? I mean, it seems like the outcome is that the recycling industry did the MRFs and the redemption industry continued on with the same material, same amount, everything. But did we have the same, conflict at that time between the recycling industry and the redemption industry?
Yeah, I think, this is one of the challenges. I wasn't in the building at that time either. There was somebody else other than me, but I think what, John Casella was told by the legislature that was in place at the time, that if you get behind and invest in the universal recycling law, we'll discuss eliminating the bottle bill at some point. And here we are. So, and as you know, you and I have had discussions about the state of Delaware, who is the only other state in the country that has a universal recycling law like Vermont's. They actually eliminated their bottle bill and their recycling rate is higher than ours. Theirs is at 37, ours is hovering at 34%. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thanks. Thank you.
Mr. Tomasi, thank you for your patience.
Sorry, it took me a couple seconds to get back engaged.
It always does.
First of all, I'd like to thank the chair and the committee for having me today. My name's Paul Tomasi. I'm the executive director of the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District in Lynnville, Vermont. I'm the longest serving tenured district manager among district managers in Vermont. I've been in this position now for 24 years. We serve the largest geographic area of the state, covering parts of 5 counties, but primarily Essex, Caledonia, and Orleans, with a few towns in Washington and Orange. And we serve the 3rd largest population. I would like to address the question that Representative Beck just posed a few minutes ago about increased costs. Adding materials to the bottle bill, and you know, I think what the representative from Casella, you know, her whole presentation is predicated on collection in more urban areas. Obviously, being in the Northeast Kingdom, our perspective is from a rural standpoint. And, you know, I guess I would point out that most of the state is rural. However, you know, the population, I don't need to tell you, is centered in Chittenden and Rutland counties. We would not see an increase in costs with expansion of the bottle bill. And I think that's important to note because, you know, I think for years we've been kind of led down this path that, and Ms. Crosby even suggested that single stream is the most efficient method of collecting recyclables. I take issue with that because that's not the way we collect it here in the Northeast Kingdom. And I think some municipalities have started to reevaluate that. It really depends on how you measure efficiency. You know, if you're talking about costs, at what point does single stream price itself out of being a viable program? So that said, I'd like to go back to our issues here in the Northeast Kingdom. We pay to get rid of our glass. It is separated from other materials currently. It's shipped to Hardwick, and then from there it goes to Canada, where it's made into fiberglass. Unlike the materials going through the MRF, we're able to, we never had an issue with getting rid of mixed paper because it's not contaminated with other materials. So this whole time that markets have been low, we've been getting $45 to $75 a ton for mixed paper. And I would agree that paper is one of the larger constituents of our waste stream. As far as glass goes, we process between 2,600 and 3,000 tons of material a year. And of that, glass represents about 250 tons. Next to tires and hazardous waste, glass is the most expensive commodity we need to manage. The issue that we have here in the Northeast Kingdom deals primarily with wine bottles. There was testimony in a Senate committee, I believe it was in 2020, that stated that wine bottles were such a small percentage of the waste stream that it really was insignificant. And of course, that came from someone from the wine industry. So I did some quick numbers. I decided to measure glass coming from a couple of facilities, just chose a couple at random. And I did this back in 2021. And I chose the glass coming from the town of Cabot and also Morgan. And I measured wine bottles versus all the other glass. And in Cabot, 56% of glass consisted of wine bottles. In Morgan, it was 46%. And I'll guarantee you that if I chose any other towns, we would find a similar range in the 50% region of wine bottles as a percentage of all glass. So our concern here is that the current bill only adds wine bottles to the bottle bill in 2027. I guess we would like to see that accelerated. We're paying about $65 a ton to get rid of our glass. And if we could cut that in half, it would be a significant savings to us. Now, we do make money on the plastic, as Ms. Crosby mentioned, but it's still a cost to process the material. And so I think that's an important point to remember here. We have two parallel systems. And I think it's imperative that somebody make a determination which system is in fact more efficient. I think the DSM study that was referenced talked about a 1% increase, but what we're talking about is a shift from single stream to the bottle bill. And if the bottle bill is in effect a more efficient method, I think it makes perfect sense to shift more materials away from the single stream system into that bottle bill. Now, I'm not saying that, I know that answer, but I think the committee brought that up a couple times, and I think that's very important for somebody to look into before making this decision, because they are parallel systems, and there should be one that emerges that's more efficient and more effective at keeping materials out of the landfill. And also, I think the cost to consumers is an important factor as well.
Representative.
Hey, Paul, thank you for testifying. So I completely agree with you that if we had one of these systems was more efficient, we should pick it. But the thing I can see a scenario where a recycling center can take everything and sort it and get the paper to where it's supposed to go and the plastic and glass. I can see that logistically happening with machinery, some combination of machinery and hand. I can't, however, see the scenario where a redemption center would take everything and get it to where it needs to go. So while I agree with your point, I just don't understand how a redemption process could transform to handle everything. But I know you've been in this industry a long time. How would that work?
Well, I guess I'm not suggesting that the redemption system would handle all materials, although there are some initiatives that would require manufacturers of printed materials to be responsible for their management, which would help this process along. It's extended producer responsibility. And, if the manufacturers have more skin in the game, they're more likely to find the most efficient method for processing the material. Right now, products are sold with no consideration as to what's done with the packaging afterwards.
Yep.
We pay for a product, we pay for disposal. And if the manufacturers were more responsible for that, you'd find probably less packaging and more packaging that was recyclable.
But even then, would you envision a scenario where a redemption center would be taking in packaging material? Is that? It just doesn't seem like that would work. But
yeah, I don't necessarily see redemption centers entering that arena as much as I would see recycling centers taking on redemption.
Right, but that's, I guess, my point is that if we want to use the most efficient method, it just doesn't seem like the redemption. If you did redemption, you still have to have recycling, but if you have cycling, you don't necessarily have to have redemption. I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure we could solve that conundrum right now, but it's certainly worth more thought.
Okay, thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
We actually, is it okay to wait?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Tomasi, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Erin, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My apologies for jumping in last minute. Thank you for taking a moment to listen. For the record, I am Erin Segrist, president of Vermont Retail and Grocers Association. I certainly appreciate the committee's thoughtful questions and the discussion. I think that it's a perfect example that we have been trying to reiterate over the last couple of years, that it's a good conversation, but we need to keep having it. We appreciate the discussion in House Natural and again, here in House Ways and Means. I will do my best to be brief. Just a quick background of the association. We have about 750 members across the state. That membership is inclusive of general retail, grocery, convenience stores, redemption centers, distributors, manufacturers, et cetera. Just under 500 of those members are food retail related. And of those members, we have 8%, about 8% of those members are redemption centers. We have done a survey of our membership, and most recently, the membership has reported that 96% of retailers are against expanding the bottle bill in the current system. 97% of respondents agree that the redemption system in Vermont needs to be fixed systematically. And 95% report that the third-party processor, which you heard from earlier, they are still continuing to fail in picking up those containers that are dropped off at the redemption centers on a regular basis. So we are trying to make sure that we are heard, that the redemption centers and the retailers are heard in this conversation. Given the issues with the system, we appreciate the redesigned proposal and hope that we can continue the conversation, but there are significant outstanding questions. Specifically, how does commingling work within the PRO?
Can you say that sentence again? You cut out for that last sentence.
We have questions about how the system is going to work. And so we would love to continue the conversation. We appreciate that there have been different proposals brought forth, and I think we're heading in the right direction. We're just not sure how to answer outstanding questions. What does commingling look like within the PRO? Are there going to be multiple commingling programs managed by the PRO? What does that mean for a retailer, or what does that mean for a redemption center? Are we going to have multiple pickups from different companies? Is it going to be one company doing all of the pickups? We have one company doing the pickups right now. And again, we have significant issues with the smaller redemption centers getting consistent pickups. I have members calling me, I will say a less frequent basis than a year ago, but we still have members who don't receive pickups from TOMRA, on, again, a consistent basis. They could be holding on to redeemed containers for well over a week or 2 weeks. So what does that do for customer access? I will quickly reiterate what Ms. Deatley said. Also, expanding the system is going to be more costly. She reported that the different types of plastics are going to be handled differently. So, we talk about reducing the sorts. Redemption centers have well over 150 sorts now. But what does that look like? We're just asking that we're not barreling down the highway as we're building the system. We want to make sure that we're doing it right. We've been working in a system for several years now that isn't working. We want to make sure that it's done properly without, making it more difficult for the retailers and the redemption centers, the ones who are receiving the product, ensure that they have the ability to service the customers and also redeem these containers that benefits the state. The last point I do want to make in listening to testimony this morning, the redemption centers have been closing across the state. So I know that there's language in the bill that would require a specific number within a county, a location within a 15-minute drive of every Vermonter. I think that that's fairly unrealistic. And again, we're seeing more redemption centers closing. So how can we expect that additional redemption centers will be opening, especially if the investment in the technology that we have heard about this morning is going to be on the retailer or the redemption center. We had a redemption center report in the House Environment Committee that system cost them $100,000. I don't anticipate that redemption centers are going to be opening up and popping up around the state when they have to invest in one piece of equipment for $100,000 on top of investing in a brand new business. So I think there's some thought that needs to go into this. Again, I do appreciate your time in hearing our concerns. I'm happy to take questions.
Representative Beck and Andrew.
I have two questions, Aaron. One is, can you quantify the number of redemption centers there are in the state of Vermont and the net of how many we lose in a year typically?
That's a great question. I know that there's a list of certified redemption centers on DEC's website. I don't have that, but I can have that to you this afternoon.
Okay. And my second question, as far as the difficulties that some of the redemption centers are reporting with TOMRA, is that an urban problem or a rural problem or a certain part of the state, or is it seasonal? Is there anything any kind of, clarifying data you can attach to that?
I've been hearing from members around the state. It can be down in Bennington, it's up in the Northeast Kingdom. I think, some of the larger redemption centers, my understanding is that TOMRA will leave a truck for them, like a large truck that they can just fill up and then they call and say, come pick it up. It's the smaller, more rural redemption centers that have a harder time with consistency. I get it. Everyone is short-staffed, right? So TOMRA is going to focus on the larger centers where they can bring back more material. But, it's negatively impacting the communities who can't redeem containers because they've got too many and need to shut down.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, I share your worry over the reduction in the number of viable, satisfactory redemption centers around the state. Obviously, one of the intents of the producer's feature of this bill is that there will be minimum locational standards for the producers group to establish that. My question to you is, do you have a sense that the location of redemption centers have taken sufficient, significant pressure off the particularly small retailers? Is there any data to suggest, in a community or a market area that has a redemption center, the burden on the general retailer has fallen by X? Do you know?
That's a good question. I do not have that data.
Okay.
Yeah, Representative Taylor.
I'm a little concerned about the number of empty cans that are being transported all over the place when they could be crushed. Is it not possible to have the redemption centers, maybe you're not the person to ask, who would read the barcode, crush it, and then have crushed material to send rather than sending empty cans all over the place?
Yeah, so my understanding is the reverse vending machines, I believe those crush the cans, the machines that you can go to the grocery store. And they'll read the barcode, crush them, and then Tomra will come and pick those up. The location in Morrisville that testified that it's $100,000 machine that will read the barcodes and then crush them. But
okay, that's what.
Yeah, so there are larger quote reverse vending machines from my understanding, but it's a significant investment.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate your time.
Yes.
I have to follow on my good friend from Colchester's comment when the gentleman from Rutland Center was remarking on this. It struck me that because we have embedded in the producer return bill a very, very particular way to allocate the costs of the materials coming back, we're in this choke point where the barcode has to be read before it's crushed. But we all know ecologically the best thing to do is reduce the size of the material before it goes anywhere from the point of contact. So I think that's a knot we have to cure. How do you allocate the producer responsibility and at the same time protect, if you will, the efficiency and the ecological value of returns?
And I think some of that is definitely not our jurisdiction, but which is hard. It's really, it's hard.
It's money.
It's like right on the edge there. It's really hard. Yeah.
I mean, maybe that relates to the S-cheats and, if we stick with the 50%, there's expectations that explicitly go to infrastructure to help reduce transportation of uncrushed cans.
Well, one obvious observation, what comes into the state by the seller, the producer, a high percentage of that finds its way into the stream. So we don't need to read barcodes at the other end. We know what comes in and how much comes in.
So there's a few technical tweaks that I'm sort of aware of that have come up over the time that I'd love to talk through with Michael if you have a minute. And then this is just sort of an opportunity to name other outstanding issues for us on this. So one is I think we all got a letter from the wine folks who were not able to join our testimony today because I think they're trapped in an airport because of the storm. What?
I hope they have wine.
I do wine at the airport. I'm
Indeed.
surprised at how much the kingdom seems to drink the wine. Really? Well, has a reputation. But Michael did a little bit of research that I wondered if you could share with us.
Sure. So the letter from the Wine Institute indicated that it will be difficult, if not impossible, for wine makers who ship directly to consumers to collect the deposit and comply with all of the laws under or requirements under the bottle bill. And they reference the fact that neither Maine or Iowa, which has a deposit on wine, requires the deposit on direct to consumer beverages. I talked to A&R about this question because currently there is authorized direct to consumer sales of containers that are subject to the deposit, specifically malt beverages and ready to drink spirit beverages. They have difficulty determining whether or not those manufacturers are collecting the deposit and complying with the law. So I looked at Maine specifically and what they do for direct to consumer wine, and they simply exempt it from the requirements. They say they do it in a somewhat peculiar way in their direct to wine statute, not in their bottle bill. They say that direct to consumer wine is not subject to the bottle deposit requirements. I think you might want to include the exemption in the bottle bill and not in the direct to wine bill if you want to do it. But that is what I learned. It's difficult to comply with the requirement. It's difficult for A&R to enforce, and the other states that, two of the other states that regulate wine do exempt direct to consumer.
Yes, go for it. One of you. I don't.
Is there any quantity constraint or standard that triggers the exemption? I'm thinking of shipping one bottle as opposed to a case.
Not in Maine.
Okay.
Now, there is in Maine limits on how much can be shipped at one time. You can't ship 50 bottles at a time. I think it was 10 bottles was the max.
Thank you.
So if we did something like that, 10 bottles or something like that, and they had a barcode on them, stuff, there'd be a little leakage of pin set deposit sort of stuff, but relative to the whole big picture would be pretty small.
Well, the other thing that the Wine Institute said in that letter is that they don't want to label the wine bottles that are sent direct to consumer.
Okay, so there wouldn't be any leakage, just different kind of thinking.
Michael, did they mention any uptick in having it shipped directly to consumer as opposed to purchasing at the store?
Uptick, you mean uptick in the
More sales?
They did, the letter did not reference it, but the letter didn't reference it, no.
Okay, so that's one sort of housekeeping thing that we want to come back to.
But there's two questions there.
Yes.
Do you want to exempt direct-to-consumer wine? And do you want to exempt the other direct-to-consumer beverages?
Yes, both of those questions are there.
Okay.
I think we're going to think about it a little bit.
Okay.
The mechanism right now for the escheats being divided, I had a conversation with some folks in the energy and, someone help me.
Environment
and energy, thank you, Environment and Energy Committee. And they didn't see the same fiscal note we did, basically. And so they did not intend to reduce the amount of money going into the Clean Water Fund. And so what I'm thinking a mechanism that might be cleaner for the Clean Water Fund. Is a waterfall mechanism. I really didn't mean to form such a terrible sentence, I'm sorry. That basically is very clear that it's sort of, if more money goes to escheats than what we are sort of anticipating going into the Clean Water Fund, based on what's going into the Clean Water Fund now, then that money would go to the Bureau. So if it wound up being half, great, it would be the same, but if not, it might be a little bit less. And that way we're keeping the Clean Water Fund whole, the PRO still get probably right around the same amount of money they're expecting, but we're not sort of risking the Clean Water Fund in the same way. So I just wanted to put that on the table. I imagine that's not very hard to draft in the grant.
I was just gonna look at how I would do that.
No, I have not gotten to the bill back yet because A&R is going to offer us some recommendations on bill back language. That is a little, okay. Yes.
Or we could simply pick a percentage that's more favorable to the Clean Water Fund instead of 50% going back to the manufacturer's 45 or something.
We could, I think, I feel like the problem came up because a percentage was selected and there's so many unknowns on what the return will be.
It's an idea, Matt.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that idea. Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah.
But did you talk about at all what happens at the end of 5 years where it would all then go back to clean water?
No, we have not talked about that. Yeah,
What do you think about that idea?
I think that part's great.
Okay, fine. I'll take that. Cannot be drafted.
Well,
So I'm looking at how the sheets works, and right now, the deposit initiator, the initial manufacturer that collects the deposit is required to remit at the end of each quarter the unclaimed deposits. So you're basically saying they remit until they hit a certain amount that they've, well, that's, I don't know, because they remit to the Commissioner of Taxes. And the Commissioner of Taxes is making an ongoing calculation. And how does the Commissioner of Taxes then inform the deposit initiators to stop?
could they remit all of it the way that they do now and then some
the Commissioner
amount of money is transferred back?
Transferred back.
Yeah. Would that work?
I can do that, yeah.
So there's the bill back, which we're waiting on some language on. There's the mechanism for the clean water. There's possibility around the wine bottles. I'm curious if there's language in the bill that I've lost track of around Tamara's reliability. Because I feel like we heard a lot about that 2 years ago.
About what liability?
About sort of ensuring Tamara being reliable in their schedules.
There isn't anything in the bill right now about that.
Anyone else have sort of technical flags?
I assume that we'll also hear from A&R on the automatic trigger piece.
Ah, the automatic trigger.
And I guess I would like to kind of reconcile the estimates about how many bottles and what the sheets is before.
Yeah.
Someone had brought something up to me that I'm just trying to like dig through the bill and see if it's addressed. And I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. That not all wine comes in bottles anymore. So like a lot of wine comes in cans, right? Like a normal beer can size can. And do we need to address that differently because the amount collected is different, or do we want to let that stand?
It was briefly discussed in the other committee, and it was discussed how liquor bottles come in various sizes and various types of containers, and they are all subject to the 15-cent deposit. And then the committee didn't make a decision about wine that were in varying volumes.
Yeah.
Kind of hate to bring this up at this point, just following.
Really, whenever anyone starts a sentence that way.
It's always going to be.
And maybe, maybe it's not an issue, but just following on Representative Andrews' comment, how do we deal with box wine at this point?
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of wine that gets sold in bags and boxes these days.
I remember talking about that 2 years ago.
So right now, the definition of container, when you look at the definition of container, it's if it's sold in glass, if it's sold in PET, if it's sold in HDPE, or if it's sold in aluminum. So if it's in a plastic pouch, the concept, would it be a PET pouch? Would it be? There's going to be questions like that. And A&R has authority in the bill for a year to determine what is subject and what is not for the purpose of transitioning the program.
Good. Cool.
And then they have rulemaking by which they can officially document things about those decisions.
It is 12 and we are going to stop, but I promise this is not the last time we're talking about the bill.
Okay, cool.
Thanks. Thank you, Michael.
So for purposes of the making the Clean Water Fund whole, what amount?
Let's check in with Joint